A quick Bible lesson, putting feet to your prayers. Ephesians 2, verse 9 says, "Not by works so that no man can boast," in the context of a salvation, which can mean wholeness or whatever it is you're believing for. It might not be something you can get with just hard work alone, although you might have bragging rights. Ironically, the New Testament also said in James 2:17, "Even so faith, if it hath not works, it is dead, being alone." In my personal faith experience, I have sanitized myself of all the voices and names related to anything that anyone would consider a higher power. I do, though, believe in faith and miracles, and have experienced unexplainable things when regarding applying faith issues like status and ranking. Now, imagine two praying hands, kind of like a figure, a statue, or a tacky picture you saw at your grandma's house. Now, imagine those praying hands with a pair of feet underneath them. That's an image of putting feet to your prayers. Faith without works, in other words, prayers and the like, without corresponding action. An alternate translation said that. It's basically useless. Why believe in finding a mate when you expect she or he to somehow magically knock on your door? It is likely your future spouse going to randomly seek you out, unless you have a thing for pizza delivery guys. I admit, I have met a few cute pizza delivery guys over the years, and he might be someone I would consider marriage material, especially if he can bring home the bacon, or quite literally, the Canadian bacon. Otherwise, I will rely on a balance of faith and corresponding actions. After all, I might as well help my faith to give my faith something to work with. Therefore, I bombard the chaotic multiverse with positive thoughts and words, while I bombard society with my constant annoying barking at every opportunity that comes my way, because eventually something has to give. Since I quoted the Bible, I suppose it's only fair to quote the Grateful Dead. One way or another, this darkness got to give. And what's the Grateful Dead doing here without Bob Marley? What about Bob? If you are a big tree, we are a small axe, sharpened to cut you down. That's a 1973 Bob Marley song, Small Axe. What's a rut to do? I like to think of overwhelming the visible and invisible realms with so much stuff that it is like a dammed up reservoir that is bound to overflow someday and break through even the strongest dam. Perhaps you were facing an oak tree in your life, or even a giant sequoia. Some of us are dealing with an African baobab tree. It just takes a sharp axe and a despairingly number of exhausting blows to break such a giant. In addition to this tedious lifestyle is the addition of self-care practices, rest, and even times of retreat if necessary, in order to stay sane and in some cases not die in a fit of self-destruction. Do the math. Pick your favorite motivational speaker and get their magic formula for success. Now evaluate the amount of alpha-related powers they had already possessed compared to what you are lacking. You might come up with a discouraging and staggering number when it comes to how much work and suffering you might have to endure to get the same results they did. Aside from luck, which does sometimes happen, I like to focus on the rules, not the exceptions. Imagine a real estate seminar with the fine print on the brochure testimonials. Results not typical. We believe in the anomaly, and statistically, if you roll the dice, eventually you will get all sixes. However, for some of us, we might not be that lucky, even trying in an entire lifetime. Sadly, the alphas keep telling the underdogs things like being persistent, not giving up, and keep trying the same dead ends in order to get the same results they got with little time or effort. I hate to be one of these people who send discouraged people down more dead ends, because that's mostly what I get. Constant misleading advice. Sometimes I tell a gatekeeper type person something like this. In the hour you have spent telling me to do things that I do not have the power to do, you could have spent that hour on the phone with people who listen to you, advocating for my cause. When they resist, I muse about doing so is somehow against the law and will get them fired. Sadly, they just keep telling me and sending me down dead ends. Please note, abuse and neglect like this is perfectly legal and does not threaten the careers or reputations of anyone in professions like this, including social services. In addition to balancing my faith practices with my business practices, putting feet to my prayers, I've also survived by balancing my exhausting and discouraging efforts with as much self-care to counteract the deadly influences of the constant abuse and neglect from those in places of influence and authority. Success gurus testify about dealing with rejection. Some of them even have sob stories of feeling or being suicidal and maybe even having a season of homelessness and some form of institutionalization. However, in the experience of a runt of society, it is cruelty based on the gravity of the situation. During a recent teaching session from this perspective, I referred to following your dream as torture. I have countless examples of dominator-type people hiding and sometimes literally destroying the inspired works of creator-type people. This is how desperate they are for power. Depriving the world of original and useful content is not as important as them maintaining their places of influence and recognition. Although this might explain why Western civilization did not seem to advance much during the Dark Ages, this also explains the 21st century. When power is valued more than progress. As much as I abhor all the times in history when gifted people are silenced, I must admit it came in handy one time. Although some people admire Adolf Hitler, I never cared much for him. With that funny little mustache, he reminded me of a grumpy Charlie Chaplin. Suppressing creativity has been going on since the dawn of civilization. And even with the advances of the 20th century, there were a lot of lost ideas, art, music, and especially films. There was a time around World War II when the Nazis did actually employ some super smart people who were ironically capable of working on the atomic bomb. All of them were either killed, imprisoned, or happened to escape somehow. To add to the irony, the United States government employed several Germans who helped invent the bomb. Although many were German Americans, I still think the irony is strange. If there are any more stories like that, I suppose that can be a boon. Otherwise, it is clear that power is often valued more than progress. Listening to success gurus and the struggles they had faced to advance their careers typically upsets me because they are preaching to a crowd that is mostly in a very different situation. The alpha suffers when they battle other alphas to strive to the top. They feel like an underdog in that context, and in a lot of ways, I admit they are. However, considering the significant risks I have had to take and get little to no results, in addition to the significant amount of loss and grief I have suffered, for those who have been alienated from society as I have been, it is considered a form of torture. So yes, they talk about how hard it is and how everyone needs to be persistent and all that typical jargon. What I fail to hear in these entertaining homilies are some significant issues that these types of folks need to address. As much as I like to listen to positive self-help audiobooks, I admit that when I listen to some of their anyone can do it discourses, I might verbally exclaim, "Fuck you." Many motivational speakers get notoriety because they emerged from underdog-type demographics or communities, which meant they had to work a little extra hard. Yes, we all get that. We've heard that. Because of their race, gender, economic class, country of origin, and even abuse survivors, one thing is certain. Based on my observation, these are alpha types that need to address their born leader nature and differentiate themselves from most of their followers who are probably not that lucky to have that biological and naturally given power. They also need to be careful about their formulas, discouraging people who blame themselves for not getting results. In addition, there has got to be consideration for the rents of society in the same fashion that public places build ramps for the handicapped, along with the fact that there also needs to be more care associated with all the trauma. Alien nation. But for now, we live in a society that tends to isolate the quiet ones when they try to be rewarded for their valuable contributions in addition to being punished for their isolation. I have observed another sort of snowball effect in addition to those who have attention getting more attention. The juggernaut of alienation. Those who get little attention are more likely to be ignored. It's like walking with friends and passing by an old-fashioned chain gang. I've recently discovered this is still a thing. You want to set one of them free, but your friends urge you that those prisoners must deserve that punishment if they are in that predicament. In a similar way, if someone is alone, there is a sort of assumption that the particular person, perhaps perceived as an introvert, may want to be left alone and respectfully carry out their wishes, or what I have come to believe, that person is alone because they must deserve it. This is likely derived from Ice Age era instincts and furthered by Emperor era civilization mentalities in order to create order. That is another reason why people are afraid of others who have been alienated. It is as if they not only need to be punished for their alleged crimes, but that others need to be protected from them as well. This negative snowball effect can easily be turned a recognized employable asset into a worthless nuisance. Does everyone have a price tag? Oh, human life is priceless. We cannot put a value on one person over another. We are all worth the same. Is that true? Or are all those statements just myths of society's jargon? Throughout my lifetime, I have heard countless things said about how all people, no matter what gender, race, economic class, or whatever, do not make someone more valuable. For instance, when a jumbo jet airliner crashes, it's a major media-worthy disaster. A multi-billion-dollar 747 jet just crashed today and carrying precious cargo, but that's nothing compared to the lives that were lost. We are told as if people are not only equal to each other, but are also worth more than things. Although we would like to believe that history, even recent history, says otherwise. The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund, commonly known as VCF, was a U.S. government fund that was created by an act of Congress shortly after the September 11 attacks in 2001. Wikipedia continues. Kenneth Feinberg was responsible for making the decisions on how much each family of the victim would receive. Feinberg had to estimate how much each victim would have earned in a full lifetime. Feinberg's story was featured in a book and also in a film called Worth, which premiered in 2020 and ended up on Netflix in 2021. It seems to give a different message that human life can and is literally valued like we would value things. I actually do not necessarily believe that to be exactly true. I don't think civilization values people based on their economic status, at least exclusively. In my experience and research, I'm convinced that not only people are valued as things, in addition, people are not just valued for their things, although that can be a significant determining factor. The following is a not-so-true story that I remember hearing as a young man several years ago. A rich man, a scholar, a Boy Scout, and a priest were on a flight on a small private plane. Suddenly, the plane developed engine trouble. In spite of their best efforts of the pilot, the plane started to go down. Finally, the pilot grabbed a parachute, yelled to the passengers that they better jump, and bailed out. Unfortunately, there was only 3 parachutes remaining. The rich man grabbed one and said, "I'm obviously important, and I deserve to live," and jumped out. Phew. The scholar said, "Time magazine stated that I am the smartest man in the world, and I deserve to live." And he grabbed another one and jumped also. The priest looked at the little Boy Scout and said, "My son, I've lived a long and full life. You are young and you have your whole life ahead of you. Take the last parachute and live." The Boy Scout handed the parachute back to the priest and said, "Oh, not to worry, Reverend. The smartest man in the world just jumped out with my backpack." As we have probably observed, those with a college degree are often treated differently and have a lot of privileges in society beyond just job opportunities. Something I have also observed is that those who are accepted into a university working on a degree also have the same access into this realm of civilization. Here's the deal. Completing a 4-year degree is just another step within this kind of status culture, but not necessarily their entrance into that world. They, quote, arrived, end quote, the moment they were accepted into the program. They might be jobless, accumulating massive amounts of debt and other characteristics of what we'd consider a loser. However, having access to all the perks of a full-time university student, all the credibility, all the perceptions and other privileges are very synonymous with someone working on a lucrative career as a college graduate. In addition, postgraduate degrees and perhaps some special honors, along with other forms of status and academia, can be considered nothing more than climbing the ranks of high society and thus adding to someone's overall worth. I've also met a lot of houseless people with advanced degrees. In addition, I have met people, especially those successful in the entertainment industry, who have never gone to college, nor did they even complete high school, who have been very successful. History tells us that because power has been considered more valuable than progress, anything or anyone that would make the overly powerful feel threatened will easily try to rid their world of quality workers. The mid-20th century communist witch hunt was just one example of how so many people suffered the abuse of power. You see, all they do is deny people their right to work. That's a quote from the film Trumbo. On the other hand, there have been well over a dozen successful executives who were caught lying on their resumes. Reading how they ended up, I don't think they suffered much at all, considering their dishonesty. And some are even considered heroes, especially in the recording industry. Here's a quote from David Geffen. "Did I have a problem with lying to get a job? None whatsoever." David Geffen, billionaire entrepreneur. In addition, an interview with members of the band Oasis, one of them admitted, "Because I fucking blogged my way into it and I'm an absolute chancer." Airplane 3. If I were to make a fictional version of the film Worth, I would like to create a scenario where individuals had to be priced based on their overall status, not just their solid and liquid assets. Kenneth Feinberg had until the end of 2003 to come up with a conclusion on how to disperse the billions of dollars in that victim fund. To calculate someone's worth based on things like the attention economy would be way more of a chore, in addition to so many other factors. For lack of a good example, and since I am writing too much about plane crashes, I'll reluctantly use the example of an airline crash. In the news today, our breaking story is about the jumbo jet that went down earlier today. The aircraft was valued at nearly $400 million, and the public is grieving the loss of such a valuable plane. The flight was nearly at capacity, and passengers included several dozen immigrant workers, inmates, and mental patient, Ukrainian refugees, but likely not very valuable, in addition to the several black babies that were being sent to an orphanage because they could not get placed in responsible households. There were, though, several young black men who were typically have the little to no value of society whatsoever. However, I've just been told that most of those African-American boys were award-winning professional athletes, primarily basketball players. Therefore, the nation grieves for the loss of these valuable assets. Besides the working class, disabled, elderly, welfare moms, and other expendables, there were several notable passengers who sadly lost their lives, including social media influencers, multi-billionaires, politicians, media professionals, business executives, mega preachers, leaders in law enforcement, education, and other important people whose lives were worth far more than most. The cargo lost on this flight included several hundred millions of dollars of valuable and personal items, but nothing compares to the loss of the priceless artifacts that were on their way to be delivered to the museum. The scene suddenly changes to a panel of experts specializing in status-based economics. We have already gone to work crunching the numbers based on monetary values of valuable people that were lost in today, including the impact on society based on the attention economy, says one commenter. Another man in a suit and tie exclaims, but we must consider the overall net value, calculating the loss of all individuals who are a drain on our society, especially the mental patients, the disabled, many of the seniors, and the inmates that were being transferred. We count that as a net gain. The third commentator in the panel interjects, I think I'm speaking for a lot of us that we are happy to lose some of those undesirables because the black babies, knowing that statistically will probably end up being incarcerated within the next 20 years, as for all the Latinos and the Slavic people on board, it's hard to say. The first commentator continues, as I am beginning the calculations, I have been considering that there are several passengers whose contribution to society matches close enough to their drain on society that we consider them write-offs and really have no effect on any gains or losses. Breaking news, just in. A figurine of the ancient deity Moloch was just to have been said to be among some of the priceless artifacts that were destroyed in the crash and considered lost forever. Archaeological experts are claiming that there is no way to put a price on some of those objects. You want a brand new car, a tropical vacation, and a kidney. Besides needing a strong social support system, I simply could not find anywhere in major medical web resources that can admit that someone's importance or power has anything to do with whether they are eligible for an organ transplant. In addition, caste or social status are not cited in the context of official documents, including any, to my shock, wealth is also not technically taken into consideration. Although having enough support is a sign of social status, I would dare to guess that anyone in my country, and most people who know enough about the realities of the American healthcare industry, has a pretty good idea of what's really going on with things like organ transplants. Unofficial medical documents and resources would like to focus on race and economic status, which is also common knowledge. If you don't believe me, just intrude on your local dialysis center and observe the kinds of people waiting for a kidney transplant. There are cases where loved ones or similar relationships dares to risk themselves in order to donate one of their kidneys. The patient might be marked with every commonly recognized underprivileged trait, with the exception of one thing. At least one person recognizes them as having a tremendous value to make that kind of sacrifice. Basically, no matter how unfortunate the patient is, having someone who values them that much adds up to what I would consider a lot of social status. Otherwise, if someone has enough money and power, they can, either in the USA or abroad, get almost whatever organ they want. If you have not figured this out yet, I will make it clear that social status is based on a lot of factors that add up, in addition to social status being fluid. Someone's ranking in society can have little to nothing to do with race and economic status, although those characteristics will likely contribute to or diminish someone's social status. It can also change instantaneously based on different environments. Being a spectator on The Price is Right is actually quite a privilege. Every audience member is scrutinized just like most applications and talent scouts and other media gatekeepers use. But once the host calls your name to be a contestant, your already significant status just multiplied significantly. In addition, if you happen to be one of the highest winners, you multiplied that even more. I applied for various roles in show business, and I have noticed it is the same whether you are a member of a studio audience or a reality show or playing the part of a character or an extra or some other talent. Whenever you think you are seeing an ordinary person in the media, think again. You are either seeing a status person or who either appears to be ordinary or someone lucky enough to be handpicked as a symbol or a mascot to further perpetuate these myths. Disney's The Kid, a 2000 film, the protagonist, played by Bruce Willis, is an image consultant. And there was a scene where he was trying to redeem the ruined reputation of a greedy businessman with a media reel. The character, Russell Duritz, was asking the assistant for a dozen 8 to 12-year-old kids, 8 boys, 4 girls, 5 white, 4 Latino, 3 black. It's a similar model that shows like Sesame Street started employing, where they give the viewers images of inclusion and diversity. Although I agree with this model compared to a decade earlier when mainstream media portrayed images of segregation and exclusion. I do not like it if there are motives behind these efforts for the sake of just trying to appease progressive media types. Simply put, what you are seeing may or may not be inclusion. What you are seeing might be more about exploitation. If I'm watching a network television and they come out to do some random people they feature, I always suspect that there was a purpose behind who they picked to broadcast. One time while channel surfing, I caught a major network daytime show which showed a clip of what looked like a couple of African-American women on welfare in a housing project, and getting some kind of gift and their reaction. At first, I thought, well, this is a great gesture, until I realized this is probably just another publicity stunt. It may be clear to many media consumers what it takes to get that kind of exposure. However, when it comes to these anomalies of what appear to be ordinary people, it's because they had some kind of insider privileges, or they were lucky to be picked as a pawn in a giant game that required their face for a brief moment, likely soon to be discarded or perhaps ruined. You are not Lou Reed. Andy Warhol, who was quoted by Time magazine in 1967 as saying that one day, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. This is also quoted as, in the future, everybody will be world famous for 15 minutes. Although, he may not have literally said any of that. When I was younger, we were told that everyone's famous for 15 minutes, according to Mr. Warhol or whatever. Now, this led to a cultural maxim about having your 15 minutes of fame. Whatever it is, I believe it was just a joke or something taken out of context, like the Beatles being more popular than Jesus, according to interviews with John Lennon. I would rather not claim to go into detail about what those famous people actually mean by those various statements, but there's one thing I do know. Famous people can get away with just about anything. Lennon and the Beatles already had lost their conservative Christian fans to the moment they plugged in their guitars, and lost a few more with some further bad publicity. But it did not hurt their careers, and if anything, it helped. Hence the phrase, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Ai Weiwei, an outspoken Chinese contemporary artist, was nearly killed by a brutal attack from government officials. He survived and sought justice, among other things, as opposed to most Chinese nationals who would have probably been imprisoned, tortured, or killed, and would have gone entirely overlooked by the public, even within China. One of the people interviewed for a documentary referred to his fame as protecting him, as well as protecting his supporters, in the context of a protest event. The following is from the transcript of a film called Never Sorry. These were ordinary people. These were people with a lot at stake in their lives, and with none of the security and the fame that he has that protects him. And they knew that. These people were not naive, but these people were inspired by something that he's doing. The difference between an activist who is successful or not depends almost entirely on power, influence, recognition, and popularity. Otherwise, an activist working alone or in obscurity is just another nuisance lawbreak who has no positive effect related to their efforts. That's the difference between a peace march and someone who is out taking an afternoon stroll. I appreciate how the word fame was used not only to demonstrate how someone could use that power to practice justice, that same fame was also to empower others to stand up to injustice. There are a lot of famous people that I admire for their creative contributions. Some, in addition to, advocated for social and environmental causes, and some just got away with too much attention and did little to nothing for the world. Some of the folks in the New York art scene a few generations ago were just good at looking pretty or good at getting attention. But I must admit that many of them challenged art, film, music, fashion, and design, in addition to being a catalyst for LGBTQ rights. When I was younger, I could have sworn I had a conversation where I was proposing some type of edgy creative project, and I was met with contempt. I responded, with something like, well, Lou Reed did something like that, and further met with, but you're not Lou Reed. I don't think that particular conversation actually happened, but there have been a lot of conversations like this, even to the point of being a cultural cliche. Sometimes I like to do something pretentious and overpriced just to see people's reactions. If I behave like a famous artist, nothing seems to be more offensive. Although none of these lovely wine and cheese people will admit how utterly offensive to the industry and ridiculous overrated celebrities are. One thing that never offends, and ironically seems to please others, is when I sell myself way too cheaply. As far as famous people who can get away with just about anything, based on my personal tastes, I always thought that Lou Reed wasn't a good singer and a mediocre songwriter. He just happened to be at the right place at the right time and looked cool. I do have a decent amount of respect for Lou for a handful of reasons. One of them is being the first pop artist to produce an album of industrial noise music for a major label, but Metal Machine Music in 1975 would have gone unnoticed by the public if it wasn't for his popularity. Although Cass Elliot was punished by the Crown for theft, it didn't seem to hurt her career. Her famous quote, "I liked him, so I took him," didn't seem to be met with contempt by her fans, although the London authorities felt otherwise. We have all seen countless times where famous people do things that would otherwise be either ignored or handled very differently if it were done by an ordinary person. This is true with any degree of social ranking and status. It is also strange to take an inventory of things that were considered good or bad, tasteful or tasteless, original or copied, smart or stupid, and evaluate how these things are regarded by others, shunned or completely overlooked based on someone's personal power and influence. The epic, frightful, vengeful return of Susie Hang Around. Written by Benny Andersson for ABBA and featured on their 1974 breakthrough album Waterloo. This song has bothered me for years, despite its wonderfully catchy and musical hooks. Reading about his life, even as a kid, Andersson was quite privileged in my opinion, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was based on real events. Perhaps it was a sincere confession. However, in my opinion, it seems to minimize this kind of playground bullying. My legal team in fancy suits instructed me to delete this entire song lyrics, except for these tiny snippets. Look for a friend of your own. Nobody wants you around. Stay away. Susie Hang Around. On June 6, 2017, marked a time in my life when I was doing everything I could to get myself out of a 9-month-long depression. The only thing that worked better than any form of self-care therapy or medication was to get myself out there and work on my business as much as I could. I even employed a sort of fake art residency that month where I went on a binge creative trip. I was listening to that ABBA album where it played this enjoyable, catchy tune, and that as much as I enjoyed it, I never really paid much attention to the lyrics until then. That was a period of time when I was suffering a considerable amount of social alienation. I was listening to this song, and I decided to finish it and wrote a new verse in the context of our current culture and technology. Susie grew up alone and sad. People assumed it was because she was bad. She followed me on Instagram, but I deleted all her comments and marked her emails as spam. But she found my house one day, and I couldn't believe her face. Susie grew fur all over her and showed me her wings she flapped. It was a blur. Red laser beams shot from her eyes. Then she disappeared and flew into the sky. I looked at the aftermath. I barely survived her wrath.